So we've come to the end of the beginning of your journey, and I hope you've learned some valuable information in this course and have enjoyed putting your drone together and getting started in FPV. It's going to be an incredible journey for you. But before you continue on your FPV journey, I want to point you in the right direction on a few things. First of all, let's talk about motors. As you know, I've recommended the Emax Eco 2 series 2207 1700 kV motors. And you might be asking, why has John recommended these specific motors? Well, number one, I know that a lot of pilots use them and swear by them. But let's first talk a bit about motors in general. There are two main things you need to know about motors. First of all, the motor stator. That's the 2207 part of the Emax motor we're using. 22 is the width in millimeters and 7 is the height. A taller stator gives you more power at higher RPM, and a wider stator gives you more torque at lower RPM. Common stator sizes for 5-inch propellers are 2207, 2306 and 2307. So we have the 2207 motors, which are narrower than, say, a 2306 motor, which gives us more power at higher RPM. So if you're more into freestyle down the track, you might want to go with 2306 or 2307 stator motors. But for now, while you're learning, you're honestly not going to notice much difference using the wider stator of the 2207. Then there's kV, which is the RPM or revolutions per minute that a motor spins per volt that is input into it. And generally speaking, higher kV motors like the 2300 kV or above are used more for freestyle, and lower kV motors like 1700 kV are used for racing. So we're using a 1700 kV motor, and again, it's not going to make a huge difference while you're learning, and down the track you might prefer a higher kV motor if you're more interested in freestyle. I also want to point out to you some sites and places that will be really useful to you. For example, rotor builds. It's useful to see other builds. For example, if you search on rotor builds for the TBS Source 1 5-inch, you can check the different components, the layouts, the peripheral mountings for TPU 3D prints, and you'll find a lot of these also on Thingiverse. Okay, these TPU mounts that you can get and you can have printed, or you can go and buy a 3D printer yourself and start printing yourself. So for the Source 1 5-inch, okay, you can get a TBS Immortal T mount, which is one of the types of antennas for the TBS Nano. You can get arm guards, you can get 3D printed HD camera mounts, all kinds of things from Thingiverse. You can print your own parts, as I say, via a 3D printer, or you can choose a local vendor or go down to your local club. Someone may be able to print for you, or use a commercial service like brain3d.co. So then how are you going to get into FPV? So then there's forums and vendors and people to follow and get involved. Go down to your local FPV club, subscribe to some YouTube channels and their Discord forum. There are also good beginner guides and instructional websites like Get FPV, Rotor Riot and so on. And I'll leave a link to those in the lesson notes. There are also some leading brands that you'll need to know about, like FreeSky, Team Black Sheep or TBS, Fat Shark, Furious FPV, and so on. Again, I'll leave some links in the lesson notes for that. And for FPV forums, you might want to visit places like Into FPV, RC Groups, FPV Drone Pilots, and many more. Again, links in the lesson notes. You'll also want to know about what tricks you can perform. You can have a look at these on YouTube, okay? But I've also provided a Tricktionary list, okay? A list of all of the tricks that you can provide and in the order in which you might want to tackle them. But I suggest you tackle these in the order that I recommend. And above all, Follow the regulations and be safe. Follow the guidelines given in this course about weather and staying away from water, wind direction, people, arming precautions, and so on. Follow the basic guidelines specific to your country and state for any drone operation. So in the USA it's FAA, in the UK it's CAA, in Australia it's CASA. I'll provide links for these. Okay, basic rules: drones mustn't be flown more than 120 meters above the ground. Drones must be kept at least 30 meters away from people. I'll leave a list, I won't drone on about those. But it's very important that you follow these guidelines. You mustn't fly above people or in a populous area. This could include beaches, parks, events or sporting ovals. So do the right thing and don't ever fly over people's property unless you have specific permission, and even then be aware of how far you are from other properties where you don't have permission to fly over. As this is not only dangerous, but it will perpetuate the common perception that all drone operators are spying into people's homes. Not good. Always remember that a quad only has 4 motors, and if one of these fails, the quad can drop out of the sky, causing damage, injury or worse. And there's also the possibility of video or RC failure too, which of course more commonly occurs. Just always think of the worst case scenario. And this may sound a bit doom and gloom, but if you operate within common sense and legal boundaries, you'll be fine. Research and follow the aviation regulations in your country and your state. Note that you don't normally need to be a qualified drone pilot with an RPA or remotely piloted aircraft operator accreditation with your aviation authority to fly an FPV quad, unless you're operating commercially. However, you do normally need to be a member of your state or country Aero Modelling Association. So I'm a member, for example, in Australia with the MAAA. This is the first thing you need to do. And you'll also need to get permission to fly at a local park from your local council to be fully legal. Or if you want to fly on a local property, you need permission from the landowner. Keep abreast of things like sub 250 gram laws and remote ID, and you should be fine. Then there's digital, DJI and SharkBite. Now, one of your next steps is to change from analog to digital, but you won't regret bragging about starting out with analog, as it's where it all started. As I've said, there are actually 2 ways to do this currently. With the DJI digital FPV system, using either the Air unit or the Vista, which is a smaller VTX which is more commonly used for racing. You may already be a DJI pilot or a DJI fan in general, and I'd say that generally speaking at the moment, their digital systems provide the best video experience that's available on the market. However, as I've said, there are still some drawbacks. First of all, cost, which is why I've chosen analog goggles that can be converted into digital with SharkBite. Buying DJI goggles are more expensive than analog goggles that can be converted. More FPV clubs are starting to embrace DJI systems into their race systems, but it's still not perfect, as because DJI goggles both receive and transmit video data, and this can cause interference with other pilots you may be flying with. I personally fly with both DJI and SharkBite, but I use DJI more for flying freestyle on my own and SharkBite for racing with other pilots. With the SharkBite system, which is developed by HD0 and Fat Shark, this can be used with any FPV analog goggles by using the following components: the RX51 module, which is installed on your goggles, and one of the VTXs that they provide. And you'll need an HD camera as well. As I say, I'm so happy I've hopefully helped you get into FPV. Above all, have fun and stay safe. Keep in touch with me and keep flying. Every time you practice in the sim or go out and fly, you'll be one step closer to becoming a really proficient pilot. Take care for now.